Going. Okay, so hello and very warm welcome to everyone, and good afternoon UK time and all the other times that might be represented here. So this session is being run by Bill Davis. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Bill, and it is a model and approach for career management, incorporating type and IQ and EQ. So, Bill has a postgrad in career counselling, underpinned by a degree in psychology and a master's in occupational psychology, and over 4 decades of experience lecturing, developing career tools, managing career development departments, training people in career guidance, and very extensive use of EQ measures as well. So it is such a pleasure, Bill, to welcome you to your session here, and just really looking forward to all that you are going to share with us.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, I'm feeling every inch of those 4 decades. But I hope to bring some of that experience to bear. So thank you very much. Yes, so thanks to Sarah, and thank you for all your support in the session. Thanks to BAPT, and thanks for all of you for turning up to my session. Thank you very much. So, as Sarah mentioned, I'm here today to talk really from a personal level more than anything else, from a practitioner level, um, about what I've learned in terms of career coaching and how I've incorporated type and EQ in how I help people um, in their career planning, career transitions, um, etc. Um, and I want to really put this in also in the context of the changing world of work. So I'll start off the session with a fair bit on that. Just to say a little bit about my background, and Sarah's mentioned it already, but just to give you a kind of a linear view on that, which I think is relevant to this session, is I started off with a degree in economics, and I ended up in the world of finance for 2 years, and I could do it, and I got good results, but it just didn't feed my soul. So I got out of it, did a postgrad at Bristol Polytechnic, which is now the University of West of England. I got the postgrad in careers guidance, worked with kids, worked with adults, and in that journey, a range of things happened. But I was introduced to type and psychometrics during that period, and I did my OU degree in psychology during that. Um, and then met Joe actually, who's in the session, and joined JCA, where I had basically two kind of wings to what I was doing. On the one hand, it was very EQ based, emotional intelligence based, working with managers and leaders, helping them develop, using EQ quite a lot in that coaching process. And on the type side, I use type in that arena as well, but on the type basis, I use my careers background to help and support Joe with developing a product called Maps, which was a suite of tools that we trained people in who were working with particularly young people and young adults, people to get to make choices in their careers and get into jobs, and solve unemployment and things like that. So that's a little bit about me and what I bring to the session. Um, so what am I going to cover? As mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the context and changing context of work, because I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. I'll introduce my simple model and a process I use and the tools I use within that. I'll then, in that process of talking about my model and how I include tools, I will incorporate some elements of how type and EQ particularly fit in. Um, and then I'll aim at summarizing all that in a framework that I will end on with my summary. Um, if there's time, and I hope there'll be time, there'll be some Q&As at the end as well. So some time for, for you to question or make some points. Um, so just to start off, when I first trained in careers, the definition I was given was a career as a pathway through life. Um, so what I'm going to talk about really is relevant through the whole career life cycle, including retirement. I think retirement, particularly in the modern age, I think is not the right word anymore. Um, and I think it is particularly relevant to what I'm going to come on to, the concept that really it's our whole life journey is a career, some of which we'll get paid for, and some of which we won't. Um, Context. So I wanted to talk a reasonable amount, really, about the context of career choice planning and management. Um, I trained in the late 80s and got into the careers guidance arena. And certainly through the 90s, there was the constant drumbeat was change and how change was getting faster. And there were little concepts like, yes, what's coming is the paperless office, which is so quaint, really, to think about. And in the corner of the office I worked on was a BBC computer. So our whole um, part of our company had one computer, and it was a BBC computer. And Liz was the person who sat at that computer, and her job was to type in data from some young people. So she got five people's data, typed it in, and the computer then took 15 minutes to churn away and integrate that data. Um, in the meantime, she read a book or knitted, and and that was in the 90s. You know, it doesn't feel that long ago to me. Um, but then as we got into the 2000s, the drumbeat that I was getting stronger and louder was the idea of the fact that the workplace has become a VUCA environment. That's the thing you heard time and time again, an acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, taken from the military actually in origin. Um, and now in the 2020s, there's a new kid on the block, artificial intelligence. Um, and I want to say a few things about that, where we are now, because that those 4 decades that Sarah talked about earlier on have led to a position now which I think is a really a key juncture. I think when I'm doing careers with people. Um, and I just want to mention a few things around this fact that not only is change permanent, it's always been talked about, but it's accelerating. And in fact, the new arena, it's going to be exponential, is the next phase. And I want to talk about that in some detail. But before I do that, let's do a little quiz. So, Sarah, I'm going to hand over to you to do a little poll and see whether the technology works.
Okay, so let's hope this does work. You should be able to see a quiz on your screen. There are 5 options there, and you ought to be able to rank them into what you consider to be the first driver of workplace change, the second, third, fourth, fifth. And if you expand your screen, then you ought to be able to get the column function up and be able to do that. So hopefully you can. Please do shout out if you can't. And please answer the poll.
There are five key drivers named by the World Economic Forum as the drivers of change in the workplace. So we're just asking you to put those in order. of impact.
So you ought to be able to do that by clicking on so column one, column two, three, four, and five. Are people saying that okay?
Is that as from this week, Bill?
Yes.
I'm going to come on to that, Joe.
Okay.
You're ahead of the game.
Perfect. Okay.
So really, it's guessing what the World Economic Forum would say in 2025.
Okay, so I think we have one person left to pick their choices. Tell who that is. Shall I close the poll and see what and we
Let's
can
just
share the
go ahead
results?
because of time. Yes.
Okay, so we'll close the poll, sharing the results.
Right. So help me interpret the results, Sarah, because I can't
Okay.
see it on my screen.
So, oh, can you not? I,
No, I can see I can see
okay.
relative
Yeah.
scoring, I
So I
think.
think the bar charts are indicative of the number of people who have scored that as their first one or their second one. So
Right.
tech digital
Yes.
is the main one, and then it kind of goes down from there. Green transition energy, the second, and then we've got economic uncertainty uh, as the third rated.
Right. Lovely. Okay. Well, let's do the big reveal,
Okay.
if we may. I'm just trying to make my slides work. So, according to the World Economic Forum 2025 report, which, if you wish to, that's how you can get into the detail of all this. This is the order that they put it in. Um, but as Joe has just said, there's a lot going on geopolitically at the moment, which might reorder these things. And of course, they all knock on each other as well. But so this was just a little bit of a teaser, really, to get us starting to think. But I think for me, what I've taken from my research is the top two are what are getting most attention, and appear to be the main two things which are at the top of mind for most CEOs and sort of in their decision making. Of course, we can't ignore the others, and they all knock on each other. So, um, and for example, the tech digital, one of the biggest expanding job roles that, according to the WEF, is the technical use of technology for managing risk. So a lot more jobs are going to come about in that area. And of course, tech digital is going to be big in terms of the green transition and energy and so forth. So uh, all of these really link together. These are really five key drivers that all go together. I just wanted to make a personal note about demographics and geopolitical elements because I think another theme for me, listening to speakers talk about the future of work and the future of the workplace, is very much a humanitarian issue, even at a very broad level. I mean, people are talking about we're going to need fewer people to do work. So what happens to the rest? So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I do want to signal that there's going to be with what's coming, there are going to be some really significant issues about how wealth is distributed and how workplaces are governed, and how indeed countries are governed. But anyway, so those are driving forces. And when I looked into this in more detail, um, I think what Forbes was saying really captured a central point here. They call it Workforce 4.0. And what that means is what they were talking about is that we are on the threshold of the fourth industrial revolution. The third industrial revolution was digital. That was although it started before, it started to ignite in the 80s. Then the second one was really about electricity and automation earlier on in the century. And then the industrial revolution is what most people's concept of the first industrial revolution, where people moved from the fields to towns into into very different workplaces. So I want to underline what Forbes are saying here is that we are on the threshold of something very different. And again, without this session's not about going into that in a lot of detail. I've provided some references. Very happy to talk to people more about this because I found it absolutely fascinating the more I looked into it. But there were three kind of key themes looking at the WEF and other sources. And those three key themes are to do with replacement, augmentation, and creation. So I'd like to also mention that there are two people I would hasten you to watch on YouTube. Mo Gawdat, ex of Google, his surname spelled Gawdat, and Jeffrey Hinton, who's named as the kind of godfather of AI. They're very eloquent speakers, and I was very grabbed by them. And the constant themes of replacement, augmentation, and creation are caught by the WEF in terms of for replacement, for example, they're suggesting that 92 million jobs by 2030 will be replaced, will go. A heck of a lot. In terms of job creation, however, about 170 million jobs will be created according to the WEF. So that's a 78 million increase in jobs. And it's a very thorough worldwide report, the WEF. So it's interesting that that's where they were coming from. And if you look at, okay, well, which jobs are going to go? Well, they're the ones which probably predictably are those jobs which are quite straightforward, simple, linear, deal with information and data, can be easily replicated by AI and robots. And that's already happening at a pace. The more messy that jobs are, the harder they are going to be replaced. So yes, a lot of tech jobs will be as part of this creation arena. But interestingly, there are a lot of jobs will be created more to do with human qualities, and so a lot of things in the care, medical, and interpersonal arena are going to be much more prevalent, much more robust, and will actually grow. And on that basis, they talk about EQ being a lot more useful in the future. So it's one of the skill sets that they're talking about being more required in the future. But augmentation, I think, is actually the key to thinking about where the workplace is going in the future. We've already started on that with things like ChatGPT and Copilot, where we're starting to use artificial intelligence as opposed to just the digital revolution of the 80s, so on, so forth. So that digital arena really captured much more of a use of technology to get information, make inquiries, or to instruct. What we're moving to now is much more where AI is becoming a partner in the workplace. And the thing that is predicted particularly to hit the place in the next 5 years is the concept of AI agents. And they're talking about agentic technologies. And that is where AI enabled agents are trained and enabled to achieve goals. So a bit like a human, when they'll be, when you join a job or a company and get a job and join a company, people are inducted, trained, and then they're given targets and objectives. Agents will be doing that. So it's mind bending what's coming up. So they'll be able to be set goals, and they will work out for themselves how to achieve those goals. Not only that, they will link with other agents to achieve those goals. Not only that, if one agent learns something, that every agent will learn something. So this is profound. It's a bit like if three of us were trying to learn to drive, as soon as I learn to drive, the other two people learn to drive at the same pace. So it's a real revolution that Forbes are signaling, that Mo Gawdat and Geoffrey Hinton are signaling. And this agentic revolution is coming up. So I just wanted to spend a bit of time on that, just setting the context for how I work with people. Finally, just to mention that when asked for advice, Mo Gawdat said three things which I think sounded very sensible. He said, well, what do you do if this revolution's happening? What are the three things that people should be doing? And he said, number one, get used to AI or you'll get left behind. Use ChatGPT, Copilot, and what have you to find out about where AI is being used in your field. And then find out about that. And then get researched and get involved with AI. Otherwise, you will get left behind. And it's happening very quickly. Number two, he said, and be critical. Critical thinking. So you'll ask ChatGPT for some information. Don't believe it. It was his second recommendation. He said, so be aware that all it can tell you is what it knows. And so therefore, ask good questions. So actually being really good at asking questions of technology and not just accepting what it is, particularly in the post-truth era, is going to be a critical skill. And number three is EQ. He said, he says it's the human dimension which will be so much more important as we move forward. So that's the bit on context, which I hope makes sense. And what I'll go on to now is my model of working, which I think will transcend that. But I think there's elements of this that I'll come on to, which I think is really quite key to providing career coaching now for the future, for the people's future careers. My simple model is contribution plus purpose supported by evidence. And I take a lot from some training I had from Steve Miller, who has developed a process or a model called implicit career search. He's a Canadian, really lovely guy, has done a lot of work, particularly helping young people get into the workplace, but discover their purpose is what his flag waving banner says. Discover your purpose, and that's your starting point. That's your engine and rocket fuel really for your career. And what I've found is that when people are really clear about their contribution and purpose, and it's supported by evidence, it gives them motivation, it gives them clarity, it gives them material for their CV, material for their interviews, and gives them a material to help them start to make career plans in a lot more effective way, a much more successful way. So what I want to do now is just clarify what I mean by contribution and purpose, because Steve didn't do that for me. So this is the bit that I added onto the training that he gave. So I would say contribution is the answer to this question. What am I particularly good at? Um, and I've got Gardner's multiple intelligence model, um, which I'm not putting forward as a theoretically sound way of thinking about intelligence, but more as a pragmatic metaphor as much as anything else that I've discovered when working with people, particularly when I was working with kids with low self-esteem, because our cultural heritage means that uh, typically people say, well, you're either high IQ or low. You're very intelligent or you're not intelligent. And a lot of that comes from how well they did in exams. Whereas what I love about Gardner's model is that it suggests that there's lots of different intelligences. So when I'm working with people, it's far better to get an idea of, what's your graphic equalizer around this, to mix metaphors a bit. Which ones are you stronger at? Which ones are you weaker at? And let's forget about IQ. Let's talk about how intelligent you are. Um, you know, rather than you know, so which bits of intelligence are more you? Um, and when I'm working with people around trying to unpack that, I use particular tools. So I use a, a tool called Lifeline. You may be familiar with it. I think it's very powerful as a backdrop, and it's just got two axes to it. There's a vertical axis, which could be very simplified to a smiley to a frowny face on the axis. So at the top end of the axis is those times when I'm firing on all four cylinders, when I'm motivated, I have good sense of well-being, so I feel energetic, and things are good, things are working well. And of course, you've got the opposite to that. So those are two kind of moods, emotions about how I'm feeling at a particular point in time. And the other axis is time. And I ask people to chart what their story is and chart it between birth and now. And typically they'll come up with a mountain range of where they've been in life. And I ask people to put the times, tasks, events, and people that are key to where their peaks and troughs. And we'll all have had those peaks and troughs throughout our career. Um, and but I encourage them to include personal elements to that because it's part of who we are. So it's a holistic exercise. And what I then do, and there's a lot what you can build from that in terms of coaching, but two key things that I do with them. One is to ask them to describe, well, what links the peaks? Why were those peaks? Explain what those are about. And that's often about context, but it's also about content, what they were doing, who they were doing it with, etc. And so we unpack that, and that gives clarity. But I also unpack the troughs as well, because they are points where I can help people start to think about what have they learned, how were those, how was those part of their development, what skills and other resources did they draw on to get through those times. So a very profound exercise that acts as a backdrop. And some of that will add on to this thing of, well, what am I particularly good at? Because those will give clues to that. I use more straightforward things like Strengths Finder. I use action verbs as well as a checklist, and I use type. And for me, type as a holistic model, working with people who've never done it before, as I'm sure you're all aware, is a wonderful way of starting to get people thinking in concrete terms about who they are, and to actually verbalize that. And the concept of gifts, I think, is wonderful, in this context. And when I was working with young people, particularly those with lower self-esteem, what I found is that it gave them a much more concrete sense of self, and they could see themselves differently. Um, and it does give a lot of clues type into what am I particularly good at, along with Strengths Finder, action verbs, and the lifeline. We're getting to look at those strengths, and importantly, what's the evidence behind that? And sometimes if people are really stuck, Harvard came up with an exercise which I've used a number of times, and it's been profoundly useful. And it's simply a process of saying, who are the 5 to 10 people in your life that you really trust? Go and talk to them and ask them for 2 things. Number one, what do they value in you? What are the skills, capabilities, attributes, personal qualities? What is it that you value in me? And secondly, and how do you see them showing up? Basically, what's the evidence? Why do you say that? Really very profound exercise, and that's sometimes something I use. Within the type arena, back to type, not only is whole type useful for this question, but also the functions. So the dominant and auxiliary become very useful concepts in the discussions around contribution. So contribution is different to purpose. And this is what Steve Miller was mainly on about, really. He was talking about purpose. I want to try and bring this alive through a very simple story, fictional story, about 2 people. And drawing on Gardner's model, suppose these 2 people share the fact that they're good at maths, they're good numerically, and secondly, they are good with people, they're good interpersonally. They've got good communication skills, they're empathic, etc. So they've got the same kind of contribution factors, but they've got different stories. So one, good at maths, good with people, struggled with maths, had a really good teacher who got them into maths. And then they started to excel in maths and they got qualified in maths. And they decided that really their purpose was to make maths enjoyable for kids. So they became a teacher. The other person, good at maths, good with people, watched a space program when they were young, and got interested in space, got a telescope, did some lots of widgety things with science, got into the science arena, went into aerospace, but got particularly known for being a really good team leader, really good manager, and somebody who could really inspire others. And their purpose was really to inspire people about space, and particularly the teams that they worked with. So 2 different people with the same contribution, but very different drivers, really. So this question of, well, what difference do I want to make with what I'm good at is the purpose question. And you can ask lots of different questions as well under to elicit purpose. So what brings me joy? And what gets to the top of my in tray versus the bottom of my in tray? What do I spend my discretionary time on? You know, where do I get most pleasure at work? And so purpose is a very different beast to contribution, and they need to work together, and they'll both be underpinned by evidence. When I'm working on purpose, I use various tools. I use values in action, VIA, Martin Seligman's work, to get at character strengths, which are values-based strengths. I use a checklist called career drivers, which asks people basically what are the important things that they want from work. And I use type. And I particularly like the book called Do What You Are by Teager and Baron Teager. So Do What You Are, it's on Amazon, and and other very good booksellers. But do what you are has excuse me has little um, personal portraits of each type and why they do their job, how they do their job. And really, for me, sort of makes a lot more concrete this purpose element. And finally, around type, I think the temperaments lens is particularly relevant. So when working with an NF or an SP or an SJ or an NT, it's really that becomes part of the conversation around purpose because it starts to move people towards their motivational drivers. What are they after? What are they trying to do? So, and what I find is that when we've identified contribution and purpose, and when we're looking at the evidence that underpins those, it'll often describe, like when they do the lifeline, those times when they've been in flow, when they're not only doing what they're good at, but they're doing something with meaning and purpose. And when people have got that written on one piece of paper, so on one side, I get them to write the contribution and purpose, and on the other side, I get them to write their evidence that supports that. And that becomes a document which is central to putting the CV together, getting prepared for interviews, and so on. And it's just a very clarifying, simplifying process. And hopefully you can see that purpose really is the missing link because a lot of the time people are focused on contribution, but not enough around purpose. And I think that's where Steve got that from. Finally, before I move on to the next section, just to say that in terms of my own personal journey, this was meaningful to me, which is why I said at the beginning, this is a personal presentation. And kind of when I discovered type, when I discovered um, what I really wanted to do, my purpose, it really clarified for me why, despite being good at economics and figures and numbers and doing well in my financial job, it just didn't cut the mustard. Just didn't work. And what was missing was the purpose element. And once I stopped and thought, and I actually got to a real low ebb, and I stopped and thought, actually, what have I enjoyed? And it was just a short period of being on the counselling service at university. I was a volunteer student, helping other students who were suffering at college. And that little experience then, which is only a short while, inspired me to look for jobs which involved working with people. And through some research, I ended up with careers advisor as a job. So, what I want to go on to now is a little breakout question. So a little time to pause because I've been going on for too long. Just for you to kind of just think about and talk with somebody else about this question. So we're going to have about 5 minutes or so, Sarah. I'll rely on you, Sarah, to think about how long we spend on this, depending on how long we've used. But what are you particularly good at? And how do you draw on this to make a purposeful difference in the world? So, what's your own personal story about contribution and purpose? And what's the evidence underneath that? And if you could just share in your pairs, or there may be a trio, uh, and see how that goes, that conversation, whether it's meaningful. Over to you, Sarah.
Okay, so I've just opened the breakout rooms. I'll pause.
So sorry, the session should be longer. So I've always feel quite bad, particularly as being an INFJ, that I'm cutting people off. But yes, thanks, Elizabeth. Anybody have a burning question or what have you? We're short on time, but if there's anything that anybody wants to raise at this point, please do. Right, I'll take that as a no. I'll charge on. So I've got about 10 minutes more of things to talk about. So you've had the my very simple model and process of working with people. I start off with contribution and then move on to purpose with them. I want to now talk about what, obviously the central theme of this conference is EQ and type. So it's great to have Joe in the room because he put this together, and as the emotional intelligence tool that I've used extensively and thoroughly enjoy it. Um, and I want to say a few things about emotional intelligence, about EQ, in backdrop really, which I think just important for me, because I think being in Roy Child's session, I think that underlined the fact that I was very bought into his statement that it's misunderstood. EQ, you either got, they're emotionally intelligent or they're not. It's often used in a very binary kind of way, whereas it's actually a variable. So I can be emotionally intelligent 1 minute and emotionally stupid the next. So that's important. It's a process of me making sense of something, having thoughts and feelings about that, integrating my thoughts and feelings to make some choices and behave in a certain way towards some outcomes. So it's a process. Um, and it's also developed over time. And Joe did some great papers around how we develop our EQ over time, naturally anyway. And I always thought it was really uh, congruent with the Jungian process of personal development. Uh, and that it's also how I manage my personality. It's not my personality, it's how I manage my personality and my other resources as well. So the model for me has three key relevances to the theme of today. First of all, is one that I've mentioned already. I think when people talk about EQ, and Mo Gawdat talks about EQ is going to be really important in the future, in the future of work. Really, what they're talking about is relationship management at the top there. And relationship management falls under interpersonal intelligence. Interpersonal intelligence is getting stuff done through and with people. And if I could be strong in relationship management, that's a big tick in that interpersonal intelligence. But it does need to be supported by awareness of others. So, do I notice body language, tone of voice, etc., how well I do that? And also about my general attitudes towards people. Um, and of course, all of these are variables. My regard for others will vary depending on the context, depending on who I'm with. So the tool we use gives a kind of a provocation more than anything else, and a structure for starting to think about these things. So first point, really, three keys. The first key is this interpersonal side, and that was what gets talked about a lot in terms of the future of work. That's going to be more and more important. The second key really is to notice from this perspective of the model the personal intelligence bit, the left-hand column. I Personal intelligence is about getting stuff done, and I'll get stuff done well when I'm self-managed, when I'm setting goals, when I have a belief about making a difference, personal power, when I am adaptable and flexible around achieving those goals, um, and so forth. So that's self-management. And this model would say, and that needs to be supported by self-awareness, tuning into my own emotions, um, and using that data as to form information and make some choices. And I've got good self-regard. And self-regard, just very briefly, I want to just be clear here what I talk about with self-regard. I really like Bonnie Golden's work from years ago, and I can't remember the reference, so I just have to apologize now. But she talked about a little equation which was self-worth plus self-confidence equals self-esteem. And I think her book was about self-esteem. I think it's out of print as well. But anyway, it really fascinated me. And she was talking about self-worth is really about self-regard. It's about self-acceptance. It's about self-compassion. It's an internal sense of okayness or not. So that's self-regard. Self-confidence is the human doing, whereas the first one is the human being. Self-confidence is the human doing. I can be confident through my skills, my qualifications, my experience. It's the human doing bit. And we need both for our self-esteem. But most of us are brought up in cultures which prioritize the self-confidence bit. Go and get qualifications, go and get experience, etc. Self-regard bit about self-compassion, about self-worth, about self-acceptance is so much more fundamental and so much more important. And word type really helps because, with those young people I was working with, it really helps them start to get this concrete sense of self, which is different quite often to what they've been told from their cultural heritage, particularly if they're from certain backgrounds where they've had a difficult upbringing. So the second key really is this column, which is so important and knocks on to the right-hand column. And in terms of careers, this self-management piece is really quite key. And then there's the third bit, which is the attitude at the bottom here, self-regard and regard for others. And I've kind of gone into that really, that using type has been really quite central to unpacking that and helping people with that. And when we trained other organizations, I remember a couple of organizations particularly used it on the regard for others bit to recognize and understand and value difference. And it's that attitude layer is the foundation to the whole model. And it's missed in a lot of emotional intelligence models. It's completely missed. And I personally feel it's just central, and it's central to working with people in the career guidance that I do. Finally, just to say that what you've got there in terms of colors is just represents a kind of simple profile of somebody. And if that was somebody I was coaching, I would have a hypothesis. I wouldn't know until I'd started to talk about this with them. But the hypothesis here is, I think, quite clear. They seem to be much stronger on the personal intelligences than the interpersonal. And I would say this is very common when I'm working with people with a technical training who then move into management. They're often really good at getting stuff done. And often, I've got confidence from that. But then they have to step into another arena, which is far more messy, which is people. So just wanted to touch on that briefly. So let me summarize then where I think I've got to, and then you can tell me otherwise maybe. But so this is my summary framework for my session that I've done today. So top left is my simple model, contribution plus purpose supported by evidence. And the importance of purpose, really, that we need to be enabling clients through the guidance process to really nominate the purpose, not get too caught up in their contribution bit, just their skills and qualifications and what have you, but to really coach around purpose. Moving round the clock, then EQ, and particularly self-regard, just how important that is in the journey of actually mobilizing a sustainable career plan. Is the self-regard is central to that, and the tools I've mentioned, and type in particular, really helpful in that way. The reason I've spent so much time on that setup bit about humans and AI and the integration and augmentation of humans and AI is a really important bit, and it's a whole rabbit hole I went down looking at what that actually means. And beyond 2030, it gets very scary. But it's only scary if you allow it to be scary. And I think if we have a humanistic approach to it, it can be really very, very helpful. And those three elements that Mo Gawdat was talking about, learn about AI, you know, um, and uh, don't forget that EQ is going to be a really important bit of that, and start to get prepared. And the fourth element here, I think, is something I threw in because I thought it really underpins a lot of what I've been talking about, is that when I'm working with people, I think the people who are going to be successful in the future really need to have a mindset of growth and learning agility. Things are going to happen so fast that um, you will need to adapt very, very quickly. Uh, However, I think if you've got a good sense of purpose, a good self-regard, and you are engaged in what's changing, then you will survive really well. So I think I would just like to finish on that. I think the future is a bit scary for some. Some people paint a dystopian picture. Other people are a bit more utopian. I think the middle ground is probably likely. Um, but I would refer to you, particularly to Mo Gawdat's talks on YouTube. They are fascinating. And I'm just going to stop there and pause for Q&As.
Super. So thank you very much indeed, Bill. That is absolutely great and completely fascinating and very interesting. So coming to the room, who has a question or a comment or something they'd like to bring and add, please? We've got 1 minute
My only
left.
comment is this was very timely because just yesterday I got asked if I could coach a friend's son. He's an adult, he's 30, but he falls into that category of no self-esteem and in a job he hates, and with parents who are trying to push him to be something he's not. So thank you, it's really useful.
Oh, thanks, Angelina. Yeah, absolutely. And that's so common, isn't it? Other people think I should do something. But how do we help people actually form their own opinion about who they are and where they want to go, particularly if their cultural heritage is pushing them in one direction. Equally, the common theme is that people will choose what's in front of them, not what's best for them.
Yeah.
So they'll often be too simplistic in their choices. And often if they do that, a lot of people go to university, get qualifications, get into the world of work before they've even thought about their contribution and purpose.
Yeah, I think that's what's happened here, and it's made it worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And people end up in a very painful situation because by then they've usually got a mortgage and stuff, and they're trying to survive in the real world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay, so conscious of, I just cut across you saying thank you there, Angelina. The most enormous thank you, Bill, for sharing all of this. It has been absolutely fascinating. I'm going to stop the recording now.